Welcome to Pillow Tales. Tonight, we invite the gentle currents of sleep to guide you into a world of elegant mystery. Settle deep into your comfort, let your mind become soft, and allow the famous Belgian detective Hercule Poirot to take your hand. Our story begins in the year 1928, in the quiet, rolling green heart of the English countryside. The air here is often heavy with mist and the intoxicating, unforgettable scent of lavender. Now take a deep, slow breath and let the details of the past unfold around you. Chapter 1: Introduction and Setup. It was a soft, perpetually grey morning in London, yet within the impeccably tidy rooms of Hercule Poirot, all was order and golden light. Poirot, a man of routine and immaculate dressing, was engaged in the solemn ritual of arranging his boiled eggs, two perfectly symmetrical spheres, upon his breakfast tray. His friend, Captain Arthur Hastings, sat opposite, grappling with the morning's crossword puzzle and the inevitable melancholy of English August. "Ah, Hastings," Poirot sighed, dabbing his moustache with a linen napkin. "The world is too loud, too unkempt. The little grey cells, they crave symmetry, they demand peace. They are not receiving it this morning." Hastings chuckled, setting down his pen. "The peace of the countryside, perhaps, my friend. I've received a most curious invitation from Lord Harrington Ashworth of Ashworth Manor, no less." Poirot lifted an eyebrow, a miniature movement that spoke volumes. Lord Ashworth was a name known in certain scientific circles, an eccentric, tremendously wealthy, and fiercely private botanist. He was a man obsessed with hybrids, with coaxing nature into unnatural acts, and most recently, with the perfection of a new, highly specialized lavender strain. "Ashworth Manor," Poirot murmured, closing his eyes briefly as if consulting an internal catalogue. "Near Kent, if I recall. Known locally, I believe, for its vast, labyrinthine lavender fields, and more ominously for its strange, walled garden, a place they call the Apothecary's Keep." Hastings explained the purpose of the invitation. Lord Ashworth was hosting a small gathering of specialists, financiers, and close family. He was preparing to reveal the culmination of 20 years of work. A new variety of lavender he claimed possessed properties that would revolutionize global medicine and perfume, making him, inevitably, even wealthier. "He requires a mind of discretion," Hastings reported, slightly puffing out his chest. "He fears industrial espionage, Poirot. He wants you there, purely as a guest, to observe, to be a presence of intimidating intelligence." Poirot frowned at the last word, but the concept of a secret, a perfectly contained environment, and a scent-drenched mystery appealed to his innate sense of drama and order. A secret, Hastings, a walled garden, and the perfume of a promise of great wealth. "C'est parfait." he conceded, allowing a small, satisfied smile to curl his lip. We shall go. But tell me, what of the lavender itself? Is it the common sort, or something more? Hastings consulted the letter. He calls it Lavandula etherea, the ethereal lavender. He claims its scent is entirely unique, almost otherworldly, and that its oil is, quite literally, priceless. A few days later, they found themselves on a quiet branch line train, chugging through the increasingly verdant landscape toward Ashworth Manor. The journey itself was a meditation, the rhythmic clack of the wheels a soothing mantra against the soft green backdrop. Ashworth Manor proved to be a magnificent, if slightly neglected, Jacobean estate. Its primary feature, the landscape visible from every window, was not its ancient stone or tall chimneys, but the immense, undulating purple tapestry of the lavender fields stretching to the horizon. The air here was not merely scented, it was saturated, thick with the drowsy, calming, almost hallucinatory aroma of the flower. This, in itself, felt like a cradle for the mind, a perfect place for relaxation, or for concealing something very dark. They were met by Mr. Giles, the butler, a man of rigid posture and pale, watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing and convey less. He was the perfect, silent sentry of the household secrets. The house party was indeed small, creating a sense of suffocating intimacy. The other guests were already assembled in the drawing-room, bathed in the gentle amber glow of a coal fire, though it was still only late afternoon. Poirot's keen eye immediately catalogued the 4 key figures who, combined with the victim-to-be, formed the closed circle of the manor. There was Lady Eleanor Ashworth, Lord Ashworth's second wife. She was strikingly beautiful, decades his junior, with restless hands and eyes that perpetually scanned the room, suggesting a deep-seated anxiety or perhaps a dangerous impatience. Her elegant clothes seemed slightly too expensive, her jewels slightly too large, hinting at a life lived on the very edge of solvency. She greeted Poirot with a brittle charm, the kind that might shatter with a careless touch. Next was Dr. Alistair Finch, Lord Ashworth's long-standing, slightly resentful research assistant and rival botanist. Finch was a thin, nervous man, with hands stained faintly purple from constant work among the petals. He had the air of a man who felt perpetually overlooked, forever in the shadow of the master. His motive, Poirot instantly assessed, would be purely professional, the intellectual property of the etherea. Then came Miss Beatrice Plum, the victim's niece. She was a quiet, bookish woman, dressed in sensible tweeds, who held a small antique silver locket constantly in her grasp. She was Lord Ashworth's heir presumptive, a role she seemed to bear with a mixture of quiet duty and faint disapproval. And finally, seated in a corner, radiating a bizarre, almost hypnotic stillness, was Madame Zara, a self-proclaimed spiritualist and psychic investigator. Lord Ashworth, despite his scientific rigidity, had a strange fascination with the occult, and Madame Zara had been invited, ostensibly, to bless the coming revelation. She was all velvet and heavy rings, her presence an exotic anomaly in the sober English country house. The host himself, Lord Harrington Ashworth, made a dramatic entrance just as the dusk began to settle. He was a thin, energetic man, with a tightly trimmed beard and eyes that gleamed with proprietary pride. He spoke of his lavender as if it were a beautiful, dangerous child, precious, potent, and entirely his. Dinner was a tense, elaborate affair. Ashworth held court, dropping veiled hints about his plant's secret, its unique molecular structure, and the millions it would soon bring. The atmosphere was heavy, not just with the lavender scent that permeated the very stone of the manor, but with a palpable undercurrent of greed, desperation, and intellectual envy. Poirot observed them all, his little grey cells beginning their meticulous, pleasurable work of categorizing and relating every gesture, every sidelong glance. He noted the way Lady Ashworth's eyes lingered on a diamond brooch, the faint trembling in Dr. Finch's hands, the nervous click of Miss Plum's locket, and the unnerving, fixed smile of Madame Zara. The stage was set. Ashworth Manor, with its lavender fields and its walled secret, was a perfect, contained world. And in a world this perfectly ordered, Poirot knew, the introduction of chaos, the element of crime, would be all the more jarring. Tonight, you can simply relax and allow the tension of the scene to fade into a calming backdrop. The house is quiet now, the fire low, and outside, the soothing, endless scent of the lavender is all that remains. Drift now, as Poirot settles into his room, his mind already half dreaming of the puzzle to come. The soft scent is a blanket, a signal for your mind to rest. Rest now. Chapter 2. The crime discovered. The transition from the deep scent of the lavender fields to the cold light of a crisis is often swift as a world of mystery. Ashworth Manor slept under a thick blanket of night, the air outside still and heavy with the fragrance that both soothed and perhaps masked the deeper, more acrid odours of human malice. Hercule Poirot, a man who cherished his sleep almost as much as his order, was abruptly roused by the sharp, inhuman sound of a woman's scream. It was not a shriek of terror, but a thin, high note of pure, unadulterated shock and hysteria. The sound sliced through the deep, soporific silence of the manor. Hastings, already fumbling for his dressing gown, lit a lamp. What on earth was that? Poirot, already fully alert, was tying the sash of his precisely folded silk dressing gown. Mon ami, it is precisely what we came here to find. The disruption of symmetry. the introduction of the untidy element. They hurried down the dark, oak-panelled corridor, the sounds of other doors opening and hushed, fearful voices echoing around them. The scream had come from the library, a vast, imposing room where Lord Ashworth often retired late at night to consult his rare botanical texts and, more importantly, to partake in a small, solitary ritual. The source of the commotion was Lady Ashworth, pale as porcelain, leaning against the doorframe, her silk nightgown a stark contrast to the dark wood. She could only point a trembling finger into the room. The scene within was one of chilling stillness, made all the more unsettling by the perfect, meticulous order Lord Ashworth had always maintained. Lord Harrington Ashworth was seated at his immense mahogany desk. His head was resting on a pile of papers, technical drawings of his new lavender hybrid, the Lavandula etherea. The lighting was soft, provided by a single ornate desk lamp. He looked, at first glance, merely asleep, exhausted from his obsessive work. But his skin possessed a faintly ashen colour, and his usually vibrant eyes were dull, fixed. Poirot approached the desk, his short steps silent on the heavy Persian rug. He did not touch the body, but his eyes, sharp and intelligent, drank in every detail of the immediate vicinity. The victim was wearing his velvet smoking jacket. His left hand lay loosely on the desk, near a small, empty cup of fine Sèvres porcelain. Next to the cup was a delicate silver pot, still faintly warm, indicating a recent brew. Lord Ashworth was known to consume a late-night infusion made from his own highly specific blend of herbal teas, which he kept locked away. Hastings, ever the emotional one, swallowed hard. "He's dead, Poirot. Poisoned, perhaps? The cup—" "Patience, Hastings. We observe. We do not leap to conclusions. The little grey cells require facts, not melodrama," Poirot admonished softly, though his own senses were buzzing with the significance of the environment. The room presented the first, most striking enigma, the impossible crime. The library had only 2 points of access: the main door, through which they had entered, and a set of tall French windows leading directly into the famous walled garden, the apothecary's keep, where Lord Ashworth cultivated his dangerous specimens. Mr. Giles, the butler, who had now arrived, pale but perfectly controlled, was questioned immediately by Poirot. Giles confirmed that he had personally locked the main library door from the outside at precisely 11:30 p.m., as was his custom when his lordship settled in for the night. He had the key. Hastings checked the door's lock, an antique but sturdy mechanism. It was undisturbed. Poirot moved to the French windows. They were locked from the inside by an old-fashioned brass bolt, which was clearly visible and securely fastened. Furthermore, the ground immediately outside the windows, a small, gravel-covered patch was untouched and undisturbed. No footprints, no indication of forced entry. Locked from within, Poirot stated, a small flicker of professional excitement replacing his earlier calm. The door locked from without, the windows bolted from the inside, and yet the means of death, I hazard, must have arrived. We have, mon ami, a classic case, the locked room. The assembled company, Lady Ashworth, now supported by Madame Zara, Dr. Finch, Miss Plum, and Mr. Giles, were brought back into the room to establish a timeline. Lady Ashworth last saw her husband at 11:15 p.m. He was going to the library for his evening meditation, his tea ritual. She retired immediately afterward. Dr. Finch claimed to have been working late in his small laboratory annex, which was detached from the main house. He stated he finished at 12:30 a.m. and went straight to bed. He heard nothing. Miss Plum. She was reading in her room and confirmed hearing the library door lock at 11:30 p.m. She retired soon after and heard no other disturbances. Madame Zara professed to have been performing a solitary séance in her room, seeking contact with the Manor's restless spirits. She was, as she put it, deeply attuned and heard nothing of the earthly world. The time of death, based on the cooling temperature of the silver teapot, appeared to be close to midnight, shortly after the door was locked. The method, the fatal dose, had almost certainly been administered through the late-night infusion. But how, and by whom, if no one could enter? Poirot instructed Hastings to call for the local police and the doctor. But before the outside world could arrive and introduce their untidy haste, Poirot knelt beside the desk, focusing on one small, unsettling detail. Underneath the dead man's left hand, where it lay loose upon the desk, Poirot detected a faint, almost invisible smudge of colour, a powdery residue, a delicate, bruised purple. It smelled, faintly, not of the general, pervasive lavender scent of the estate, but of something much sharper, more concentrated, and chillingly medicinal. The secret of the Lavender Garden is here, Hastings, Poirot whispered, looking around the perfectly enclosed room. And the secret of the killer is contained within the same four walls. The person who left this room never actually left it at all. We leave the scene now, leaving the silence of the library to settle around you once more. The mystery is now contained, perfectly symmetrical, and waiting to be solved. As you drift deeper into comfort, imagine the scent of that lavender, soothing your anxieties, lulling you into the quiet safety of deep, restorative sleep. Let the locked room be your safe room tonight. Rest. Chapter 3. Investigation begins. The arrival of the local police, Inspector Japp's country counterpart, a competent but uninspired officer named Inspector Davies, did little to disturb Poirot's methodical calm. Poirot was not interested in the usual police routine of fingerprints and external checks. He was focused entirely on the impossible internal logic of the locked room. His first point of interest was the poison. The police surgeon confirmed the death was caused by a massive dose of a powerful, fast-acting neurotoxin. The interesting detail: it was derived from an obscure, extremely toxic plant related distantly to hemlock, but with a unique molecular signature. Lord Ashworth's research notes, scattered on the desk, provided the key. The toxin was a byproduct of the cultivation of his prize hybrid, the Lavender Etheria. The perfect poison, Hastings, Poirot mused, as they surveyed the famed apothecary's keep, the walled garden. It was a horticultural fortress, entered only via the library's French windows, now taped off, or a single heavy wooden gate, which Lord Ashworth always kept triple locked. The garden was a chilling contrast to the sunny fields outside. Inside the high stone walls, the rare lavender hybrid grew in regimented, menacing rows. Its blooms were a deeper, almost indigo colour, and the scent here was not sweet, but sharp and heady, a perfume that hinted at danger. Poirot noted small, shallow trenches around the central patch, freshly turned earth. Someone had been digging recently. "The poison is here," Poirot said, tapping his small patent leather shoe on the garden path. But the critical point remains: how was it administered in a single fatal dose when no one could approach the victim? The focus shifted to the suspects, examined through the tranquil, methodical lens of the little grey cells. 1. Lady Eleanor Ashworth, the impatient wife. Poirot spoke with her in the drawing-room, now chilled despite the fire. He noted her extreme anxiety. Her financial desperation quickly became apparent. Her debts were staggering, and Lord Ashworth was a miserly, controlling husband who had refused her any allowance. Her motive was clear: freedom and the immense inheritance. "I hated the plants," she confessed, her voice a low, throaty whisper. "They were his true wife. He would spend hours talking to them, but never to me. And that scent, it makes me dizzy, unwell." Poirot observed her hands, long, delicate, well manicured. Could they have handled raw, crude poison? Perhaps, if the act was driven by desperation. 2. Dr. Alistair Finch, the resentful assistant. Finch was found pacing his laboratory, muttering about the loss of the Etheria formula. He admitted his long-standing professional rivalry. "He called me his assistant, but I was his partner." Finch's voice was high and strained. "The molecular stabilization, that was my work. He was going to announce it all as his own. I deserved the credit, the fame, the Nobel, not the money. He robbed me of my scientific soul." Finch certainly had the knowledge of the poison. He was the only one besides Ashworth who worked with the toxic byproducts. He also had the access to the library through his lab, which was a short walk outside, but the locked room seemed to eliminate him. 3. Miss Beatrice Plum, the quiet heir. Miss Plum was demure, almost invisible, but Poirot noted a deep, carefully suppressed resentment. "Uncle Harrington controlled everything," she said simply. "My small trust fund, my choice of books, even the clothes I wore. He enjoyed the power. Now perhaps I can finally leave the country and study botany properly, the kind that doesn't involve killing things, but nurturing them." Her locket, which she constantly touched, was an old family piece. Poirot asked about it. She opened it to reveal 2 miniature photographs: her late mother and a young man, a cousin, who had died in the Great War. Her motive was less financial, more about liberation from a tyrant's shadow. 4. Mr. Giles, the impeccable butler. Giles's rigid control was beginning to crack, visible only in the minute tremor of his lower lip. "I locked the door, sir, at 11:30. I heard the bolt on the French windows slide home moments later. I was the last person to ensure his lordship's safety." Giles insisted, his eyes fixed on a point above Poirot's head. Poirot pressed him. "Did he see anyone? Anyone at all near the library after he locked the door?" Giles was adamant. No one. He was the perfect witness for the locked room, and therefore, paradoxically, its most suspicious element. 5. Madame Zara, the mystical interloper. The spiritualist was unhelpful, speaking only of dark cosmic energies and a soul dragged from its earthly shell. Poirot cornered her gently. "Madame, this is a matter for the earthly world, not the astral. Why was Lord Ashworth, a man of rigid science, so welcoming to your profession?" Madame Zara's fixed smile wavered. "He was not welcoming, little man. He was planning to denounce me. He was going to use his new botanical fame to publish an exposé on fraudulent spiritualists. My career would have been finished." Her motive: self-preservation and revenge. But how could this velvet-clad woman, seemingly unfamiliar with poisons or locks, have committed the crime? The clues were few, but highly specific. The locked room, the teapot still warm, the purple residue under the victim's hand, and the freshly turned earth in the apothecary's keep. Poirot returned to the library. He studied the Sèvres cup and the silver teapot. He asked for the rest of the Ashworth's special herbal mix. It was kept in a locked, elaborate pewter container. When tested, the remaining tea was harmless. The poison had been administered with the tea, but not as part of the stored mixture. Poirot sat in the dead man's chair, staring at the French windows and the small patch of gravel beyond. The little grey cells began to construct the scene, working backward from the moment of death. The victim sits. He brews his special safe tea. He adds the poison. He drinks. He dies. The key, Poirot realized, must be in the adding. The poison had to be introduced after the tea was brewed, but before the door was locked. The killer must have been in the room, administered the dose, and then vanished from a room that was physically locked from the inside. As the afternoon light faded, casting long, peaceful shadows over the lavender fields, Poirot's mind circled the one physical detail that seemed most out of place: the faint purple powder beneath the dead man's fingers. Close your eyes now, and allow the methodical calm of Poirot's investigation to soothe your mind. The questions are complex, the suspects numerous, but the detective's patient, steady concentration is a comfort. Feel the weight of the mystery lifting from your own mind, replaced by the soft, hypnotic rhythm of the inquiry. Rest now, with the knowledge that order will soon be restored. Chapter 4. Clues and red herrings. Poirot's investigation entered its most intriguing phase: the careful, painstaking separation of truth from distraction. The atmosphere at Ashworth Manor was now glacial, the suspects circling each other with polite, deadly suspicion. The local doctor, Dr. Thompson, provided a critical piece of information. The neurotoxin had an unusually short latency period. It worked almost instantly upon ingestion. This narrowed the window of opportunity even further. The killer could not have administered the poison hours before. It had to be administered moments before the final sip. Poirot returned to the two most tangible pieces of evidence: the purple residue and the freshly turned earth in the apothecary's keep. He took the small sample of residue and presented it to Dr. Finch, the expert. Finch, initially nervous, became intensely focused. "This isn't the dust of the Etheria bloom itself, Monsieur Poirot. This is powdered root, specifically the rhizome. That part contains the highest concentration of the toxin. It would have to be handled with extreme care." The immediate implication was clear. The killer was someone intimately familiar with Ashworth's dangerous plants. This pointed a finger directly at Dr. Finch himself, and indirectly at Ashworth's meticulous research partner, who, in life, had been Lord Ashworth. Poirot then inspected the freshly disturbed ground in the walled garden. It wasn't digging. It was more like careful disturbance, as if someone had placed a small, heavy object upon the soft soil and then retrieved it. It was too close to the wall, right beside a large, climbing rose bush whose thorns were thick and formidable. This physical evidence led Poirot to explore the first major red herring: the servant's secret. Mr. Giles, the butler, was summoned again. Poirot noticed a small, old, but freshly stitched tear in the cuff of Giles' evening jacket. Not a rip, but a careful repair. Poirot's interrogation delivered with devastating calmness, broke the butler's reserve. Giles confessed. "I did see someone, Monsieur Poirot, but not near the library. It was Lady Ashworth. I saw her late that night, around midnight, slipping out the back service door towards the stables. She was carrying something small, and her face, it was terrified. This was a bombshell. It gave Lady Ashworth a plausible, if unexplained, reason to be moving around the estate precisely at the time of death. If she had administered the poison before Giles locked the door and then slipped out to establish an alibi, the timing would be perfect. She certainly had the motive and the desperation. However, Poirot found the story too convenient, too neat. He visited the stables. There was nothing to suggest a rendezvous or a discarded weapon. Lady Ashworth, when confronted, denied it vehemently, suggesting Giles was fabricating the story out of malice, a claim that held some water, as Ashworth had threatened to fire Giles over a minor transgression just the week before. Giles's tiny, repaired tear, perhaps a brush with the prickly rosebush on his own nervous patrol. Poirot pivoted to the second red herring, the spiritualist's fraud. Madame Zara, the spiritualist, was highly suspicious, not for the murder, but for her general conduct. She was a fraud, and her presence was a distraction. Poirot had Hastings quietly investigate her background. It turned out she was an actress who had specialized in theatrical séances before turning to the richer clientele of private practice. Lord Ashworth's planned exposé was a genuine threat. To save her career, would she have risked murder? Perhaps. But again, the logistics. How did the theatrical Madame Zara, who hated the smell of the common lavender, get the highly specialized toxic root powder into the locked room? The third red herring emerged from Miss Plum's desk. While investigating the possible inheritance documents, Poirot found a small, handwritten poem tucked into Miss Plum's prayer book. It was not a religious poem, but a piece of stark, bitter verse dedicated to the silent, killing power of the root. It was a deeply troubling piece of writing that suggested she not only knew of the plant's toxic nature, but had a meditative, almost romantic fascination with it. This suggested deep psychological preparation for the crime. Poirot now had three compelling, but ultimately contradictory suspects. Lady Ashworth. The movements confirmed by Giles. Motive, freedom and money. Dr. Finch. The expertise and access to the poison. Motive, professional credit. Miss Plum. The psychological connection to the killing power of the root. Motive, liberation. Poirot stood back in the library, his gaze sweeping the room that was the heart of the enigma. The locked French windows, the locked main door, the poisoned tea. He knew the red herrings were merely shadows cast by the true solution. He returned to the single, immovable truth. The poison was delivered to the desk. The killer had been in the room and had left. Poirot picked up a small, empty, beautifully carved wooden pipe rack on the desk. It was an antique, clearly unused, by the non-smoking Lord Ashworth. Poirot held it gently, turning it over and over. "Tell me, Hastings?" He addressed his friend, his voice a soft, continuous drone. "If one wanted to place a tiny, lethal package upon this desk, and then remove the apparatus of delivery, how would one do it without entering the room?" Hastings thought of fishing rods, strings, and elaborate mechanical contraptions, all of which would leave messy evidence. Poirot merely shook his head, his face illuminated by the slow, fading sunlight. "The solution, mon ami, is always the simplest one. It is not always the most obvious, but it is always the most logical, elegant, and quiet. The simpler the mechanism, the harder it is to detect." He set the pipe rack down and closed his eyes. The scent of the lavender, heavy and inescapable, seemed to whisper the answer. "It is time now to let your mind quiet itself entirely. Allow the complexity of the clues to smooth out, becoming a soft background hum. You are not meant to solve the puzzle tonight, only to rest within its elegant framework. Feel the comfort of the deep silence, knowing that the perfect, logical solution awaits. Let the red herrings drift away like clouds in a quiet sky. Rest. Chapter 5. Complications and twists. The investigation had reached an impasse, which, to Poirot, was merely the signal that the true path of deduction lay outside the established lines of evidence. The suspects remained locked in their alibis. The physical scene was untouched, and the impossibility of the crime seemed to grow with every passing hour. Poirot decided to approach the problem from an entirely new angle: the victim's routine. Lord Ashworth was a creature of habit, and his late-night tea ritual was the key. He would prepare the tea in the silver pot, let it steep, pour a single cup, drink it, and then work for another hour before retiring. Poirot summoned Mr. Giles again, this time to discuss the simple, mundane details of the man's evening. "Mr. Giles," Poirot began, his voice barely above a whisper, "when you locked the door at 11:30, was the tea already poured? Or was his lordship still waiting for it to cool?" Giles thought carefully, his eyes darting to the floor. "He was always meticulous, sir. The door was locked after the tea had been poured and settled. He liked to sip it while he worked. I believe, yes, the cup was full, perhaps half full, when I last saw him through the crack of the closing door." This detail was vital. If the poison was administered via the tea, it had to happen between 11:15 p.m., when Lady Ashworth left, and 11:30 p.m., when Giles locked the door. But if the cup was poured and the room was still open, the killer could simply have walked in, dropped the poison, and walked out. Why the elaborate locked room setup? The major twist. The locked room was not for the killer. Poirot realized the assumption was flawed. The locked room was not a measure taken by the killer to prove their innocence. It was a measure taken by the victim to protect his secret. Lord Ashworth locked the door and bolted the windows every night to protect his priceless research and, more importantly, to keep his family and staff out of the dangerous apothecary's keep. This meant the killer entered, administered the poison, and left before 11:30 p.m. But if that was the case, why did Lord Ashworth not cry out, not throw the cup away? Why did he wait 15 minutes to die peacefully at his desk? Poirot returned to the powdered root and the concept of a delayed reaction. He consulted Dr. Finch one last time, this time not about the toxin, but about the Etheria's unique properties. Finch was initially hesitant, but Poirot pressed, mentioning the research notes found on the desk. Lord Ashworth was not just growing a new lavender, Monsieur Poirot. He was working on a timed release mechanism, Finch admitted, his voice low. He was attempting to create a perfume that would only release its primary scent after a certain number of hours, to make the oil more exclusive. He used a minute quantity of the root powder, highly volatile, as a catalyst in the oil. Poirot's eyes widened. The root powder, the same powder found under his hand, a volatile catalyst. The true complication now emerged, the delivery system. The powder was too rough, too bitter to simply drop into the tea. Ashworth would have noticed. It must have been delivered in an innocuous form. Poirot's memory flashed back to the small antique pipe rack on the desk. It was an object that belonged to an old uncle of Ashworth's, placed there for decoration. Poirot examined it again. It was carved wood, with a small decorative lid covering the bowl of one of the pipes. He lifted the lid. The pipe bowl was not empty. It contained a soft, putty-like substance, like old, solidified tobacco gum, but it was faintly pink and smelled of mint. "This is not tobacco, Hastings. It is a camouflage," Poirot stated, excitement coloring his tone. "But what does it camouflage?" He pressed a tiny piece of the pink putty onto a clean sheet of paper. As it warmed from the heat of his finger, a minuscule, crystal-like grain fell out, the size of a single grain of sugar. This crystal was tasteless and odorless, but it was a sachet of the powdered Etheria root, encased in a mint-flavored, fast-dissolving sugar casing. The revelation was simple. The killer, knowing Ashworth's tea ritual and the exact location of his habitual reading lamp, had placed the deadly, timed sugar casing into the bottom of the Sèvres cup before the tea was poured. When the hot tea hit the cup, the sugar casing would melt slowly, releasing the lethal dose only after a full 5 to 10 minutes of steeping. A period during which Lord Ashworth had time to pour his tea, observe the room being locked, and start his work. The killer left the room well before 11:30 p.m., knowing the tea itself would become the murder weapon, activated by the victim's own hot water. Now, Poirot had the mechanism, the method, and the necessity of the locked room. It was locked by the victim, sealing his fate. The only question that remained was, who had the opportunity and the cool nerve to plant a time-delayed poison in a seemingly innocent teacup, knowing the exact timing? It could not be Lady Ashworth, too clumsy, or Madame Zara, no access. It pointed back to the only person with access and technical knowledge, Dr. Finch, or perhaps Miss Plum, who spent her days quietly organizing her uncle's study. But Poirot remembered the one detail that had resisted his analysis, the faint purple powder under the dead man's hand. If the poison was delivered via the sugar casing, why would the victim have pure toxic root powder on his hand? The truth was a sudden, quiet flash of insight, revealed not in a dramatic confrontation, but in a small, symmetrical detail of the garden. Allow the mystery of the poison's delivery to lull your mind now. The slow melting of the sugar, the quiet waiting for the poison to activate. This is the pace of deep, restful sleep. Everything is in place. The end is near. Let the final complication be the soothing friction that leads to profound stillness. Rest. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for Hercule Poirot while he was having his customary second cup of hot chocolate. The brilliance of the solution lay in its elegant simplicity, using the victim's own habits against him, and concealing the killer behind the most elaborate red herring of all, the impossibility of the crime. Poirot gathered the 5 suspects, Lady Ashworth, Dr. Finch, Miss Plum, Mr. Giles, and Madame Zara, in the drawing-room. The fire crackled softly, the only sound apart from the gentle, persistent buzz of a trapped bee near the window. Poirot began, his voice calm, conversational, almost like a storyteller relating a strange legend. Mes amis, we have been hypnotized by the locked room. We have assumed the killer left after the poison was delivered. But I tell you, the killer left before the poison was delivered, using the victim's own perfect routine against him. He described the timed release mechanism, the sugar-encased poison planted in the cup hours earlier. This eliminated Madame Zara and Lady Ashworth, who lacked the technical access or the opportunity to place such a specific device. This left Dr. Finch, the expert, or Miss Plum, the quiet presence. Dr. Finch, already pale, shifted nervously. Miss Plum, however, remained utterly still, her hands clasped around her antique silver locket. Dr. Finch had the knowledge, it is true. He knew the route, he knew the timing. Poirot continued. but he lacked the final, critical piece of opportunity and, crucially, the necessary motive. Your motive, Doctor, was fame. To kill Ashworth before the announcement was to kill the secret, to deny yourself the fame you craved. Poirot's gaze settled on Miss Beatrice Plum. No. The killer was the person who knew Lord Ashworth best, knew his tyrannical habits, knew his schedule, and knew how to use the smallest detail for the greatest effect. The killer, mademoiselle, is you? Miss Plum's face remained impassive, but her quiet grip on the silver locket tightened until her knuckles were white. The full explanation, the twist. You used the timed release poison, yes. You placed the casing in the bottom of the Sèvres cup sometime during the afternoon, knowing your uncle would use that specific cup that evening. But this was only half the plan, the half designed to mislead us. Poirot held up the miniature packet of the powdered etheria root. The final truth lies here. The purple powder on your uncle's hand. This powder was not the poison. It was his desperate, final act of communication. Poirot explained the true sequence of events, preparation, afternoon. Miss Plum, the quiet observer of her uncle's routine, plants the timed release sugar capsule into the Sèvres cup. She also takes a small amount of the pure, non-encased, toxic root powder and places it inside her locket. The crime, 11:20 p.m. Lord Ashworth pours his hot tea. The sugar capsule begins to dissolve. He sits down to work, and the heat releases the tasteless, odorless poison. The discovery, 11:25 p.m. Ashworth takes his first sip and realizes instantly what has happened. He feels the immediate effect of the fast-acting neurotoxin. He cannot call out. He cannot move. He realizes he has been poisoned by his own research. The clue. In his last, frantic moments, knowing he cannot write or speak, Lord Ashworth attempts to leave a clue. He sees the powdered catalyst, the pure Eutheria root powder, on his desk, left there by Miss Plum to be returned later. He uses his last strength to pick up a small amount of the raw, deadly powder with his finger, and then, in a gesture that would be seen by the killer as a confession of guilt, he places the raw, pure, toxic powder inside the bowl of the decorative pipe on his desk. He did not realize the pipe rack was a red herring left by you to frame Dr. Finch by suggesting a delivery system, Poirot explained softly. No, mademoiselle. His final action was a confession. He left the pure poison in the pipe bowl, not as the murder weapon, but as the chemical signature of the killer. He was saying, the poison came from the lab. The poison came from the etheria. The purple powder on his hand? That was merely the overflow, the smudge of his final effort to leave us the chemical marker. He was not trying to escape the room. He was trying to sign his killer's name. Poirot looked at Miss Plum, who finally broke her stillness. Tears welled up, but her expression was one of exhausted relief. "I did it for him," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He hated his life. He was trapped by his plants, by his secrets. He was going to denounce Madame Zara, destroying the only thing that made him feel connected to the world. And the Etheria was evil, Monsieur Poirot, a beautiful, silent killer. I used its quiet power to grant him peace. And me, my freedom. The pipe was a mistake. I put the mint casing there to blame Finch." Poirot nodded gently. "The perfect crime is undone by a single desperate human error, the smudge of powder." The victim, in his final moment of clarity, revealed the truth. We pause here, allowing the quiet drama of the confession to settle into the silence. The mystery is unravelled, the elegance of the crime laid bare by the elegant logic of the detective. It is a moment of stillness, of final understanding, before the long, restful sleep takes hold. Feel the tension leaving your body now. Rest. Chapter 7. Justice served. The long night of investigation at Ashworth Manor was finally drawing to a close. Miss Plum was quietly taken into custody by Inspector Davies, her composure having returned, replaced now by a detached serenity. She was ready to accept the consequences of her desperate, calculated act. Justice, in the world of Hercule Poirot, was not always a loud public affair, but a quiet restoration of order. The chaotic crime was explained, the hidden motive revealed, and the true picture of events, complex but flawlessly logical, was placed back in its symmetrical frame. Poirot sat with Hastings later that morning, watching the sunrise filter through the tall, leaded windows of the drawing-room. The light caught the endless, rolling purple of the lavender fields, making them seem less menacing and more like a vast, peaceful ocean. "You see, Hastings," Poirot explained, stirring his cup of strong black coffee. "The mystery was not, how did the killer escape? The mystery was, why did the victim lock the killer in with him? He did not. He locked himself in with the already delivered poison. The locked room was not a challenge from the criminal. It was a final, terrible confinement chosen by the victim." Hastings pondered the genius of the timed release mechanism. It was diabolical, Poirot. The perfect, silent delivery system, using the victim's own habits against him. Precisely. It used the one thing the victim was sure of, the safety of his own routine. And the killer, Miss Plum, was the only one who saw the simple elegance of that routine. She knew her uncle would never check the inside of his teacup, only the external locks and the contents of the tea caddy. She used the beautiful silence of the Etheria to deliver death without a struggle, without a sound. The other suspects, relieved of the crushing burden of suspicion, began to make their arrangements to leave. Dr. Finch, devastated by the loss of the Etheria research, was nonetheless granted a reprieve. The police had no interest in his theoretical disputes. Lady Ashworth, though free, was left with a complicated inheritance and a world of debt, punishment of a different kind. Madame Zara vanished as quietly as she arrived, melting back into the world of velvet and shadows. Poirot surveyed the lavender fields one last time. The scent, once a symbol of danger and secrecy, now seemed merely drowsy and profoundly calming. The mystery was solved, the grey cells satisfied, and the universe, for the moment, was back in proper order. The secret of the Lavender Garden, Hastings, Poirot concluded, his voice soft and reflective. It was not in the poison, nor in the locked door. It was in the truth that the most dangerous secrets are often hidden in plain sight, disguised as routine. The journey home was long and quiet. You can now join Poirot in that comfortable silence, feeling the smooth, rhythmic click of the train wheels against the tracks. The puzzle is complete, the tension released, and all that remains is the profound comfort of resolution. The air around you is soft and still. The details of the day are fading now, replaced by the gentle, constant rhythm of your own slow, deep breathing. Feel the weight of the story, the mystery, and the tension dissolving completely. You are safe, you are still, and you are ready for the deepest rest. As you drift away, perhaps you might tell me in the comments where in the world you are listening from tonight. It's always a delight to know where our stories are finding their listeners. Good night. Sleep soundly. The case is closed. The lavender fields are safe. Sleep now.